So, I mean, this is your third time on the show, and you are like one of the most famous restaurateurs of all time. So I'm not going to waste a minute covering topics we've already covered before. And like, I just want to dig right into the new pamphlet because I absolutely loved it. It's called Life Lessons I Learned from Being a Line Cook. And you spent decades building Zingerman into like a cultural institution. And so I would assume when you write anything, it's an opportunity to look back, look at today, and look forward. And when you look back on your first days as a line cook, what is like the most surprising connection you see between that role then and the leader you are today?
Well, I didn't expect, if you would have asked me when I started line cooking, what I'd be doing 40 something years later, it would not have
Sure.
been this. I didn't take a job as a, now more and more, there's people, who and maybe it was you, but, who take a job in the food world because that's what they want to do, man. And they love food and they love business. And I listen to a lot of people that you have on the podcast and they're like, oh man, from the time I was 9, I was already,
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that wasn't me. I wasn't paying any attention to food. I didn't know you could go into business. I never really cared about going into business. I just needed something to do. You already know, but my first job, out of college, after I had driven a taxi while I was a student, but that wasn't that interesting. And then one of my college roommates was a server at a restaurant. So I didn't go into it because I wanted to be a server in a restaurant. I just needed a job and I didn't want to go home to Chicago. So anyway, I ended up, long story short, applying 3 times, which we now know is called emotional resilience. And I ended up taking the only job they offered me, which was washing dishes. And so being a line cook was, a nice promotion from being a dishwasher. Not that it was like the worst dishwashing job at all by any means, but, so it was a natural progression. But it was really just, I don't know what else I'm going to do. Let's keep going. And I mean, in hindsight, I think, all of us, my belief is you can see the seeds of everything that happened, but at the same time, it could have gone 100 different ways. Uh, I think it's not unlikely that what's in here would have ended up happening, but it might not have been from being a line cook. Might have been something else.
But is there a thread? When I look back at my first job, my earliest jobs, I always had attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
Like even, when I started my coaching and consulting practice, like my mentor in that was like, just put out videos. It doesn't matter if they look terrible, but it mattered. It mattered to me. Everything that I do needs to be just so. And it is like this through line throughout my career.
Yeah.
Is there a parallel like that for you?
Yeah, I think they're in there. I mean, just the, constant learning, which is how I grew up.
Yeah.
Is one of them. And then I think from early on, long before I was a line cook, I mean, it's always been, I'm not going to, do you swear on this podcast? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, fuck it. I'm not going to do what everybody else wants me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. And that was true at 10, and it's true now. And not as a reactive thing, but just, I want to live how I want to live. And I could do it much better today than I could then. And I can explain it infinitely better now than I could then. But yeah, I mean, it's always been like figuring out my own way, and not getting caught up in what everybody else is doing and trying to follow everybody else's lead. So I think that's certainly true. I mean, I wasn't, when I started cooking the line, it was only 6 months after I graduated. So it wasn't like that far down the road that I was, a failure yet. But, even after we opened the deli, which was 4 years later in 1982, my mother would still, why don't you take the LSAT? And, you're just wasting your education. And, and even when we had like 100 employees, and she would still ask me every year when I was going to take the LSAT.
I look at your career and like we've had so many conversations online, offline.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to ask me what your superpower is, and I think it frames so many of the things that you do. It's curiosity. I see so much of what you do. Like you are a perennial learner. You are really good at learning because it is a craft that you have honed. But it's not because you love learning. To me, it's because you are so deeply curious that you're being drawn towards anarchism. is a result of you being curious, you know?
Yeah, and not wanting to get stuck in the mainstream stuff. I think that a lot of it, it's buried. You saw it a while ago, but I think like a year or so ago, I wrote a piece. This will show you people the obscure stuff that I pay attention to. But in northern Syria, which the situation has now changed drastically since I wrote this piece, but there's still this sort of Kurdish free community, and the Kurds are a people who don't have a nation, who don't have a political state. And it's a very interesting history, and I'm very interested. Anyway, they've created a very anarchistic, uh, non-state entity is the formal name I think that they use. Anyway, so there's uh, a sociologist, a woman who's Kurdish, Dilar Dirik, and she wrote this book about that community and what's going on. There's women are very elevated there. They have half the women on all the councils, half the people on all the councils have to be women, et cetera. Anyway, the subtitle of her book is uh, History, Theory, Practice. And I love that because, and I loved it when I wrote the piece, but now the more I think about it, like that's what we do. And I think that's what makes a lot of what we do come alive. And it's certainly what makes it alive for me. So like I come from an academic family, so you could be super curious for sure, but it would be doing all this work, but then like writing a book that nobody, I didn't have to do it. You just write it. And then there's people in our industry, not intentionally, but and I know, like mostly they just do it. And they like pick up enough theory around the edges in order to help do it better. But mostly they do it and then they burn out because there's no framing, there's no meaning, there's no purpose to it. And then there's people who study history, but they don't apply it, and so part of what's really, at first just by accident and then in more recent decades, like intentionally is like, I like after we're done here, I'm going to go work the floor. And it's January, so it's going to be slow. So it's not like there's going to be that much to do. But even for an hour, before I start doing my other stuff, it's just to always reground in the basics and, just to keep practicing. So whatever I'm writing about, like I'm trying to do it, sometimes within hours of when the piece came out. So it's not just the theory. It's not just the academic curiosity. It's also the practice, and the three together, I think, come to create something really special.
When I was reading the pamphlet, my thought was, I wish I had started in back of the house. I didn't, right? I was always a front of the house guy. I was very much rooted in nightlife. But front of house, we'll call it a conventional culture, certainly not the culture you built. It's very
Yep.
dog eat dog. It's
Yeah.
very, I'm going to make my money and good luck with you and your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
This is my shift.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering how much of the Zingerman's culture was rooted in those early day experiences where if one cook on the line isn't doing well, the line isn't doing well.
Yeah, that's true. I just did a little book event about this the other day, and I was talking about that. I mean, we're all interconnected. That's one of the lessons. Everything's interconnected. And so the industrial model, the industrial revolution, which is what the anarchists were in great part reacting to negatively to, was all about, it still is about separation. So like this is your side, so in the server context that you're talking about, it's like this is your station, so whatever, like don't get in my way, it's just me. But we're all in it together, and so there's no way around it that the energy coming out of the kitchen is passing through to the guest. If the person running the wheel in the restaurant has a bad, energetic attitude, unless the expediter is incredibly skilled and able to absorb it and muffle it, it's going to pass through, literally, and that's going to go to the table and it's going to impact your tips and or whatever. So we're all in it together, and you could cook the best food in the world, but if the server gives a bad experience, the people aren't coming back too. So we're all in it together. And I think absolutely being a line cook, you learn quickly, like you need to coordinate. There's the orchestration, there's timing. And as I was explaining to a non-restaurant audience the other night, I mean, it's, there's a reason why all the chains went to everything out of a can in a box, because it's a million times easier, whereas when you're like trying to one orders a rare steak and the next one's well done, and sometimes they're on the same ticket, and you got stuff coming from, depending on the restaurant, 2, 3, 4, 5 different stations, and everything's got to get timed to get out at the same spot in the window. And like on our end, we're not a dim sum restaurant, so we can't just bring everything when it hits the window. We got to time it, and I'm like, there's a lot of orchestration to that. And yeah, somebody's running it, but you still need, just like a jazz band, you got to be, or a basketball team, you got to be able to pay attention to, and your peripheral vision is super important.
I graduated from Louisiana State University in marketing before the internet,
Mhm.
which wasn't an opportune time to graduate in marketing before the internet, before social media. But I took one big lesson away from that degree,
Mhm.
which was that value isn't what you pay, it's what you get.
Yeah.
That is what creates perceived value. And you described line cooking as an advanced degree. Was there like a big lesson that you walked away from that experience with, kind of like I did?
Well, here's the interesting thing. So, one of the beautiful things for me about the belief system or the philosophy that's in anarchism, which is not going to be well known, but one of the big beliefs is that the means that you use, so the way you go about things, has to be congruous with the ends you want to achieve. Like, it only makes sense, but there's still a lot of people with the ends justify the means, but it's just ridiculous. Like yelling at an employee to give better service, it just doesn't add up. And so there's beauty, symmetry, pattern, whatever you want to call it, to this whole thing. So when I started cooking the line, this was not my expectation. Like, I'm sure there's people listening who are like, yeah, I started cooking because I knew I was going to have my own restaurant. It's like, no, I had zero idea it would be below the top 200 of things I would have imagined I was going to be doing.
Right.
So out of that job that I didn't expect to really get anything other than a paycheck and have an interesting week, turned into, not me alone, obviously, but me and Paul and 20 partners and all the people who work here, but turned into Zingerman's community of businesses. And anyway, when I did the chapbook, it was really just, intended more like a, when they bring a palate cleanser to you at the restaurant, like it was, it's a tiny little espresso shot of a chapbook, 50 little pages, compared to like that beliefs book, which is like
Sure.
600, that is too heavy for you to take on vacation unless you're only going to one spot. But this was meant just like a little thing, and I mean, it was fun. And I thought, people will read this that won't read the bigger books, and it's all true, so why not? And it's cool to frame it in this way. Anyway, long story short, while we were in the final stages of putting it together, which means me and Jenny Tubbs, who runs Zingerman's Press, I started to read work by a woman named Carol Sanford, who I had somehow never heard of. She passed away last month in her 80s. She has 6 books. I've read them all in the last 6 months. I don't know why I never heard of her, because, as you know, like, I'm traveling in that world intellectually, emotionally a lot. But somebody turned me on to her stuff like in the summer, and it blew my mind. Anyway, there's a lot of good things in her work, but one of them is this idea that she calls deep understanding. And I've sort of done my own adaptation of it. But I think the answer to your question is that I got deep understanding, and I'll tell you more detail what that means, from being a line cook. And I think that that's the lesson. The lesson is anybody could get deep understanding out of anything if you do the work and you get lucky, but mostly it's the work. So what she talks about is like deep understanding is this shift. Like, it's so here's the 4 characteristics that I've sort of adapted from her work. One is that it's in a line of work or a field of study that has already well known. Like, I didn't invent line cooking or restaurants or whatever. It's clearly been around for, thousands of years. Second thing is that you take some twists on it, some creative connection that other people haven't done, and you make it into something that's really different, not necessarily better, but like something meaningfully different in a special way. The third thing is that what you create from that helps other people to do better in their lives or what they're doing. And then the fourth, the last but not least, is that it helps you to become yourself more effectively through that work. And then as I'm thinking about this deep understanding, and the chapbook's like coming out, and I'm like, oh my God, this is what happened to me. Is like, I took this job as a line cook to get a job as a line cook, but it really is deep understanding. And I'm not saying the way we run restaurants is better than other people, but it's definitely different. And that it's helped me to become myself in the process. And, as my business partner, Paul, taught me in the beginning, he's like, there's nothing new. Like, it's just different combinations of the same thing. So it's not really like we invented some new technology, that never existed before. It's just a different way to approach this. And I think the answer to your question is that the potential for that is available to everybody in every walk of life. But they don't know that the potential is there. That's not the success in quotes that's recognized. So what's recognized is money, power, fame,
Right.
none of which require you to have deep understanding at all. In fact, it could almost be the opposite. I wrote a piece, which you might have seen this fall, about what I realize is deep disunderstanding, which is where you actually invert it and you create something new and terrible that causes harm to everybody around you. And that's also possible. But anyway, the point of this is to do something positive. And I think the 18 lessons in here are my deep understanding of being a line cook. But the truth is, it could come from being a teacher or a poet or a parent, potter, anything.
I want to talk about deep disunderstanding for a minute because I read it and it really resonated with me. I sit in a unique place. I've done 500
Yeah.
plus interviews at this point. And I can't tell you how many really successful people I've sat in front of that I'm like, distill it for me, codify it for me. What has made you successful? And they don't understand.
Yeah.
They don't really know how they got to where they are. They're trying to, like, I see them in real time trying to grasp it, but
Yeah.
they don't. They have this disunderstanding. And so, they give these watered down, well, if you just work really hard and you've got great food and great beverage and great service, you'll be just fine, which is a disservice to every restaurant that closes that has those things.
Yes.
And so, it comes to this deep understanding. But again, I go back to the curiosity.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question would be, in achieving deep understanding, what is the first step in the process?
Well, I wrote a list which I could pull out, but without looking at the list, going from memory from a couple months ago. I mean, one of them is just, it's a lot of work. Like, and I think that anybody who is in the food world is used to doing a lot of work. Like, there's no way that you're not going to do a lot of work if you're in the restaurant business. It's just the way it is. So that's number one. Another one is that you're doing things that are going to go across, this separation that happens. So people get in the food world and then they're going to study the food world, but it's actually going to come more from, yes, study your own area, of course, but like, and I'm not saying everybody should do what I did by any means, but like studying anarchism, studying art, studying poetry, like these are all things, it's all related. That's one of the lessons in the chapbook. So like the more people are connecting things that aren't otherwise connected, the more interesting it's going to be. So that's I think is a really big one. A third one that I would put on the list is really, it's kind of what you're doing. I mean, it's pursuit of mastery. It's so not perfection, because it's impossible to attain perfection. It's not about success. Like, I'm going to win some award. I don't fucking care. It's like, that's fine, but it really doesn't change anything. It's not what drives me. I quoted Patti Smith a lot in yesterday's e-news, and there's a quote that I'll use at some point, but it wasn't, I don't think it was in yesterday's, but she just said exactly how I feel. Like, I don't really care about gold records. Like, I don't mind winning it. It's great. But what I really care about is doing good work. And that was true when she was 21, is true when she's whatever she is now, 75, and so mastery is just like, I want to just get better, and not to win something and not to get something, just because there's value in just pursuing that. So that's a third one. A fourth one definitely is what you already said on my list, was curiosity. And I think curiosity implies humility, or at least it's connected to it. So you need to be humble enough to not believe that like you have all the answers. And that you got it down. It's really understanding that we're all learning from each other, and that I could learn from everybody, right? So that's on the list. The fifth one on my list is definitely perseverance, resilience, whatever you want to call it. There's a million reasons to give up for
For
anybody.
sure.
And I'm not judging. I mean, there's no way to, for me to know what's the right, I don't even know for myself some days what's the right time to let go. But I think that anybody who gets to this will have pushed through a lot of hardship. When I look at people in life, I just wrote a piece about Nikki Giovanni, the poet who passed away last month. And, she went through a lot of shit in her life, just being Black, being a woman. She grew up when segregation was still the norm. The challenges of getting into schools or getting, like all of that she pushed through to find her own way, so that's a huge one. But that said, you could have perseverance, but not learn anything, right? So they're not always all the same. The sixth one is a very deep sense of self-reflection. So it's doing whatever regular, like I journal every day, but it can be talking to good friends and having meaningful conversations, but it's just to reflect on what happened. So, why did this resonate? Why did my energy go up? Why did my energy go down? Wait, this flashed in my head. Like, what was that about? So a regular regimen that allows you to do that. I think absolutely just an awareness of the world at large. I mean, you see in the e-news, like, in a good way, like I'm quoting from historians and poets and musicians, and they're all have something to teach me. And so that's great. And then, the last thing is what we learned from Stash Kazmierski, who taught us the visioning, which I think we went over in one of the earlier podcasts. And he passed away, I think it's 7 years ago now, which is sad for everybody. But he taught us, one of the many things he taught us is he always said, adapt, don't adopt. So like, don't just take it the way they're doing it. Yeah, learn from it, but then
Yeah.
make it your own, and that's what this whole thing of the deep understanding is like. I don't claim that we invented food service. Like, it would exist had we never been in business, and we're not that important. But what we've done is to try to pull pieces from different places and to use it to create something that's unlike what everybody else is doing. And that's true to who we are, not to be better than everybody else, just to be meaningfully real, in a way that we feel good about. So those are the things that I think lead to it. And then there is a little bit of, what they call obliquity, right? Like, so it's not like you get up in the morning, you're like, I'm going to achieve deep understanding. I just do these things. It's more the other way, which is you do these things, and then it's likely if you do them over a long period of time, it will arrive to you. It may not, but I think when I don't really know, I don't claim to have like a PhD in deep understanding. This is just me trying to figure out this shit that I learned from Carol Sanford and what it really means, but I think that the odds increase a lot if you do those things.
There were like 3 touchstones leading up to this conversation that are going to inform the next question. And so the first is, this conversation has been a long time coming. So I read the chat book a while back before the holidays. I read it again in preparation for this. And there were things in there that weren't necessarily triggering, but evoked an emotional response in me. And then a couple of nights ago, my wife goes, "Hey, should we start the most recent season of The Bear?" To which I said, "No, great show, very triggering. Don't know if I'm ever going to watch it again." And then in my group coaching practice, we have this weekly meeting, and everybody was on the call. And one of the members of the group is struggling. She's got 2 young children. She's got this busy restaurant. I mean, it's 2
Yeah.
young children's enough to break anyone. And she got emotional on the call, and everyone else was triggered by that as well. And like one of the male chefs on the call was like, "My God, I cried 2 days in a row in November and this and that." And then, in the book, you talk about, managing the emotional experience of the line.
Yeah.
And I would argue that, I mean, regardless of role within the restaurant, you must manage the emotional experience when everything is important and everything is urgent. I mean, my God, all right, like how do you maintain for days, weeks, decades? And so I would assume being on the line and knowing what that's like, from having seen it in other people. What do you think you learned about controlling and managing and interpreting that emotional experience that you still use today?
Well, I think I understood very little of it when I started line cooking. But that said, to your point, it's
Sure.
hugely helpful if you do understand it. So, uh, when I started line cooking, I didn't understand much about emotion at all, barely anything, not out of malice. I just, grew up. I don't like to stereotype, but if you're going to stereotype a male of my era, it's not uncommon, and it's probably still not uncommon today. So I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years later, when I started going to therapy, and I had this awesome therapist, Richard Kempter, anyway, and he goes like, "Well, how do you feel?" And I was like, "I don't know, fine." And he goes, "Fine is not an emotion." I was like, "What do you mean?" Anyway, like I had no language. Like, it's like trying to cook, but you don't know what saute, grill, salt, cook temp, anything is. It's impossible. So, now what I would say, having written a lot about it and having done that whole book, Managing Ourselves, and it's just what I've come to understand. I mean, I think I let's put it this way: I was always, for better and also literally for worse, able to manage my emotions and hide things. So when you're saying people have no idea why they have success, sorry, I'm side roading here, but off-roading, when they say they have no idea of it, for me, it is getting the philosophy to explain what it was. And that's the 12 Natural Laws of Business essay, which you're familiar with. And it's my belief that everybody who gets to greatness has done those things. So all the people you interviewed that can't explain why they got there have done those things. They just can't. They're what Maggie and Zing Train would call unconsciously competent. They did it, but they can't explain why or how they did it. So that was true for me with emotion when I started being a line cook. Now, I'd say emotions are like the weather. This is what I've written about. We have zero control over them. They come and they go. And some emotions, like when I wrote the Dignity pamphlet last year, started out of my despair after Russia invaded Ukraine, and it's lasted more than an hour or two. It was days, which I'm not used to. And some emotions, there's joy for 2 minutes, and then some shit happens and now you're down in it. And, it's usually way up and way down. So when I've understood that my emotions were not to be hidden, or it wasn't to deny that they existed, but also that, like the weather, I could let them pass, so that I don't have to make all, like, it's really cold here in the last 2 weeks. You have your own issues out there, which puts being cold in perspective. But anyway, if I were to make my entire life decisions because, next week it's going to be 8 degrees, they would be really bad decisions. Conversely, I need to make decisions for Monday and Tuesday of how to dress when I go run in it, and how do we handle the dogs, and, et cetera, et cetera. So my point is, it's like the weather. If you're mindful of what the weather is, you can get the right gear, you can make decisions appropriately. If you are in total denial, that won't work either, because it's going to come out sideways. If people pretend they're not angry, which is how I grew up, being taught to pretend that we weren't angry, it's like a, whatever word people use, soda or pop bottle or carbonated, whatever. Like, you shake it up, you shake it up, you shake it up, and it looks totally fine from the outside. But if you pop the top, it's going to make a mess all over everybody. And that's what I learned, is what happens, like, when I wasn't cognizant of my anger and didn't know how to manage it and how to off gas it, so to speak, it blew up later, and I'm not a big tantrum person, but still, either I was beating up on myself, or, it would slip out sideways in comments. And, being able to manage the emotion, let the weather pass through me, know that it's going to pass, know that I don't have to freak out, is good. And being to be effective at a line cook or anything, really. I don't have kids, but I would imagine parenting's no different. You got to be able to honor who you are, but still create a space that's safe and productive for the, in your case, the kids, in our case, the employees and the
You
customer.
know, I was, to thread that needle a bit further, and it's going to sound so ridiculous. I was going to ask you, oh,
Let
go
me go
ahead.
let
Go
Tammy
do
in.
your thing.
So push
Yes,
pause. I'll
absolutely.
be right back.
You got it.
Josh, say hi, babe.
No, Archie's
You can
here.
say hi.
Archie's
Here's
hysterical.
Archie.
Oh my goodness. You don't even need to see. You are gorgeous.
Hi.
That's Tammy.
Hi.
That's Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Hi. What a sweet baby.
she has the ability to turn it all around for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we're gonna record,
keep going.
but you can walk around with them out here if you want. But if he's gonna bark, we should close the door probably soon. He's not, although it wouldn't be the first dog on your podcast, I'm sure. Okay,
Sure,
I'm all yours,
for
man.
sure. All right. So, we talk about emotion, emotional resilience. And then, I've done this for 5 years. And then I wrote down like the dumbest question I've ever asked. It's so easy to look at like the outputs of your career, right? Like the outcomes that you've achieved, and assume this superhuman ability, this skill, you know what I mean? Because you built such this big thing and you're so humble about it. And so like the question was framed around like, how do you avoid burnout, right?
Yeah, I could talk about that.
But I'm sure that you have experienced burnout and had to work through burnout.
Maybe a little bit. I mean, here's my beliefs about burnout. I have
Tell
a couple
me. I
strong
want
beliefs.
to know.
Well, my strong belief is that it doesn't generally come from working too much. That's can contribute, but it comes mostly from working at work you don't believe in, and or in a setting where others around you don't believe like you do. So like if you're a surgeon and you're super caring and compassionate and trying to help everybody, but the people around you are like, oh, 5 o'clock going home, or treating patients badly or whatever, then it's exhausting. If you aren't learning, it leads to burnout. If you're not doing reflection, it leads to burnout. And so I don't think it's per se about the number of hours that you work, because I think there's people working 38 hours a week, but they're emotionally burned out because they're not doing work that's aligned with what they really want to do, or who they want to be in the world, or what they believe. So that's a big piece of it. And then the other thing is about energy management. And my friend Anise Kavanaugh, I can't remember if you had her on here, but you could have her on the podcast. She'd be great. Her work is all around energy. I'll connect you. And so we teach energy. I just taught it this morning at the new staff orientation class. So people try to combat burnout by counting hours, and that could be counting, I work too much, so I'm only going to work this many hours, or it's counting time off. Like, I need 7 hours with my, and I'm not saying it's bad, but I would suggest it's more about energy inputs. And so I've managed my life so that almost everything I do increases my energy.
That means you're saying no to a lot of stuff, I would assume, right?
Yeah, and it's also, I don't know a lot about him. There's this guy, Logan Pearsall Smith, and I think I'm going from memory, but he said like half of success is loving what you do, and the other half is half of success is doing what you love, and the other half is learning to love what you do. So, it's learning to find the joy and the beauty in everything, because it's always there. So if you go into a shift, because we're talking restaurants with the, oh my God, it's such a drag, and the employees this and the customers that, and it's slow, and I feel those stresses too, but it's just flip it around, man. There's beauty in all of it. So like here yesterday, when I was at the Roadhouse last night, there's a 17-year-old hostess who co-wrote what we call a bottom line change. So this is a change initiative that anybody here can start. She's 17 and she co-wrote it with somebody else. And it's awesome. Like, dude, that's joy, and so, just being able to notice the joy and the beauty is huge. And I think there's a lot of energy to be gleaned from that a lot of people just, they're I'm not going to say moving too fast physically, but they're not paying attention. And of course, like, I didn't grow up learning how to do that either. And so they're waiting to win the James Beard Award, or waiting to be on the Inc. 500, or waiting to be chef of the year, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I'm not saying that's bad, but it isn't going to make your life any better the next day. And you still won't be noticing the joyful little things, And so, like I just showed you on our self-imposed break, Archie, so my significant other, Tammy, is a farmer, but she also took up dog rescue 4 or 5 years ago. And she's remarkable with the dogs. Anyway, we have a lot of dogs at our house. The most recent rescue is a senior dog that's blind and deaf, and somebody dumped him in a yard in Detroit in August, which is horrible. Like, it's bad enough to dump a dog that could see and hear, but they're like defenseless. And he's a little Shih Tzu, and he weighed about 8 pounds when she picked him up. I think she thought he would live like a week or two, and then he was going to just die. But, like you and me, through love and eating good food, because she cooks for the dogs every night, and exercise and play. And, he's doing great. So he's up to like 12 pounds. He runs around. He like looks twice as big. I guess he is 50% bigger. But anyway, so like there's just so much joy in like watching him go. And like it could be this total burden, like, oh my God, are you kidding? But then there's the other way. Like, it's like, wow, if he could do this, like, look, what can I do? Like,
Right.
And so that joy is everywhere. So anyway, managing the energy, choosing to see the beauty wherever I can. And then, yeah, I do say no. So like, I'm an introvert, not like you. So I don't go to parties. Like, I just stopped going, because I don't like it, and it bums me out. It makes me anxious, and I'd prefer not to do it. And I would rather study and read something and learn, and then I'm not saying what people should do, but like I grew up watching every Chicago sports team, but then I was like, this is nuts. Like, it's taken up half my day. They lose 80% of the time. Then I'm depressed. It ruins the rest of my day. I have zero impact or influence. Like, I could do so many other things, and so again, I'm not judging that people shouldn't do that. I just made decisions for me that, that 4 hours plus the emotional lead in and fallout afterwards could be better spent, doing other stuff. So, and just saying, like, it turned into that e-news, in a way over time, that I write every week, and it's a ton of work, but I like it. And it's like running a mental marathon every week. And every week I learn new things, so I've never written one that I didn't, read some new thing or learn some new thing or connect some new things. And, even yesterday's, like, I wrote about Patti Smith, but I've liked her records since I was a young kid, but I never knew much about her, and now I do, so there you go. Helps you avoid burnout.
I thought about you. I thought about you this morning. So I was having coffee with a couple of other entrepreneurs, and one of the guys, he's a professional marketer, and he's like, "Yo, I was watching Mark Zuckerberg's interview on Rogan, and I think he's such a bad guy. I hate giving him my ad dollars." And
Well,
then
stop
the
giving it to
guy,
him.
right? And then the guy next to him goes, think about it, man. Like, name me $1 billion company that isn't morally bankrupt. And his argument was that he went on to unpack is, how do you reach any level of scale without making moral compromises? And I immediately, Ari, thought of you. As Zingerman's approach is, I'm sure, close to $100 million.
Well,
And you are a
we're a
moral
little over
company.
80. We're not quite 100.
I
Look,
mean, look,
we're all making compromises all day long. The question is where you want to make the compromises. And it's not for
absolutely.
me to
Can you
judge
unpack that for me?
what other people do. Fred Reichheld, who wrote the book Ultimate Question, which is about net promoter score, which we have adapted here and used for quite a bit. And he planted a seed of an idea, which I've written about since, which is that there's good profit and there's bad profit. And he said that companies become addicted to bad profit. And I think that's true. And bad profit does lead to burnout too, because you're working, by definition, it's work that's not values aligned, or you're serving people who aren't values aligned, right? And I, okay, we all make compromises, and I don't know the right answer. Like, my books, we self-publish. You know this already, but we self-publish. We do all the design here. Jenny Tubbs does incredible work to get it laid out and make it work. And we don't sell them on Amazon. Like, I just don't like Amazon. I think it's antithetical to the way we work. And I'm not saying other people shouldn't buy on there, but I don't. And, like, I mean, and I'm fortunate that I could afford to spend $3 more and not buy it on there if I need to. But, and I know not everybody is, but I'd rather sell less books. That's my choice, and I'm not saying what other people should do or not do, but we're all making compromises. I mean, I was saying it in the talk I did on Tuesday. I'm like, look, we all know, like, if, this one couple that are longtime regulars, I'm like, if they just came in for dinner and we had the whole restaurant only waiting on them, like, man, that plate would be unbelievably good. But we'd have to charge like, $6,000 each person, to
Right.
make it work. So we're all making compromises. But I think when we are not cognizant of our philosophy or our values, then we're making these decisions because we think we should make them, even though we don't want to. And I'll tell the story just because I told it. And I did a book event in San Francisco. I taught Zing Train in San Francisco last week, and then I did a book event at Blackbird Books, which was awesome. And
Yeah.
anyway, so there was a woman there who she's heard me tell this story, so she's like, "Will you tell the Disney story?" And I was like, "All right, I'll tell the Disney story." So the Disney story, which is not a secret, and I forget what it is. 10 years ago, our vision, and you're familiar with the process, is where you write a story from the heart that's both inspiring and strategically sound. It's the story of your future, and it's not taking somebody else's recommendation of how you should live your life. It's not going stoplight by stoplight across country. It's figuring out where you want to end up and what you want your life to be like. And our vision has always said we want to only be here in the Ann Arbor area. And I'm not saying what other people should do. I just have a strong belief about doing business where we live in the ecosystem that we're both contributing to and informed by. So anyway, I forget when this was, 10, 12, 13 years ago, whatever. So I get an email from somebody from Disney and they want to talk. And of course, there's like 12 people on their email from their end. And so
Sure.
it takes forever to get the meeting set up. We finally get the meeting set up and, nice to meet you, da, da, da. And then the guy launches into, we've been, I hope there's probably somebody from Disney listening, so I say this with respect. But anyway, he goes, we've narrowed it down to like 50 restaurants that we're looking at for, I've never been to Disneyland, but to Restaurant Row in Orlando or whatever. And you're on the list and da, 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 da. And he keeps talking and talking and talking. And I can't get a word in. And finally he pauses after like 10 minutes. And I'm like, I'm really honored. Thank you for offering. It's really a nice compliment, but our vision is that we only open in the Ann Arbor area. So it's really not anything we would consider. And he goes, well, I don't think you understand. Like, this has been 2 years of research. It started like this and we've narrowed it down and you're a finalist and this is a really big deal. And I finally pause. I'm like, I'm serious. Like, it's humbling. I'm honored. But our vision says we only open in the Ann Arbor area. So it's really not going to work. And he goes, I don't think you understand like the statistics, same store sales. And he's throwing all this. And I'm like, you know what? I understand, but our vision is that we only open in the Ann Arbor area. And then I said, if you want to open Disney in Ann Arbor, maybe then we would have something to talk about. And he goes, well, I don't think that's going to happen. And I said, well, then I don't think this is going to happen either. And it's not a cut on Disney. It's just, here's our vision. This is what we're doing. And it wouldn't have mattered, maybe for world peace, I would have done it. And I mean that seriously, but beyond that, like, I don't want to do it. Like, I don't care if it's fucking $20 million. Like, it's
Yeah.
not worth it because you get a lot of money, but then you don't feel good about what you're doing. And then you spend the money on other things, but now you're stuck with your job that you don't really feel grounded in and congruous with, So, I mean, that's a kind of big glaring example, but we're all making a million of those little decisions. And, there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, but I think the further we get from doing that, the more burnout, back to your previous question, the more the burnout comes, the less good we feel about what we're doing. And maybe the bigger people's bank account gets. And I'm not down on money, but it's not an answer.
You've brought up Zing Train a couple of times, and the chat book comes out of that, and so many chat books have come out of that. And I wanted to ask a question framed around, dignity and lessons learned from this and that. And something we've never really talked about as many times as we've talked is the intention behind all of it. You're right. You write copious amounts. You write for a specific audience. And is it part of a larger vision to reshape the hospitality industry? Are you trying to give tools? Is it like I'm just, like What
Yeah.
does winning look like? Because you've built this massive audience, this massive infrastructure. To what end?
Well, there's no end. It's not trying. I'm not a crusader, and I'm not full of myself enough to think we should change the industry. I'm an anarchist. So if people want to run their business in a way that's completely different than ours, I don't need to judge them as a human being. I just don't need to do it. And I may choose, like, with some of those big companies, like I won't go there, and I don't need to badmouth them. But I also can choose, like everybody does, where to spend my money and my time. I think, it's just to make people's lives better. And that includes my own. Like, it's not completely selfless. Like, I like to learn, and I like good food, and I like to help people grow. And, that's the work. And look, no matter what we've achieved, like, we're a tiny drop in the universe. Like, if we do 80 million, like, we're not whatever your colleague this morning, was saying, like, we're not $1 billion company. And I'm like, why do you need to be $1 billion company
Right.
anyway? And what do y'all do with the other 7 billion that you're going to, like, I don't know what the fuck they do with it. Like, and, but it becomes like a competition, and it's just like more and more and more, there's no end. And I think for us, it's more, everybody here is different. I'm not everybody here, but it's really just about doing great work. It's the Patti Smith thing, like, if we're going to make food, let's make some fucking great food. If we're going to give service, let's really make it so people's days are made, and that we're helping people to really feel good. I just because the dogs were just here. There was a couple in for dinner a couple months ago, and when you've been doing this as you have, and everybody listening, like, you could tell from people's energy when something's wrong. And they just seemed, they were there with your age, couple of younger kids. Some was wrong, but I don't want to pry. It's not my business to pry. But anyway, one of the servers said no, they had to put their dog down today. And I've been through it, and it's 10 years this spring. I put my dog, who was 17, Jelly Bean, down. Now it's almost 10 years. I could say it without crying, but for whatever reasons, like, it was really hard, and I get it. So anyway, I went over there, and I shared my own story, and there's not much you could say. Like, it just sucks. And one of the other servers had been through it not that long ago. She went and talked to him. One of the managers had one of her dogs die in his sleep, like 2 months, so there was a lot of compassion and a lot of commiseration. And then I didn't do it, but one of the managers or servers decided to buy their dinner, which is awesome. Like, I would have done it too, but I didn't have to, which is even better. It didn't come. And it's, in a horrible night, they chose to come to us. They're having dinner in our place. They're talking to their kids about death and the dog. And we were able to provide them with some comfort and solace through that act of compassion, and that's awesome. Now, you got to be profitable so you can afford to buy their dinner, but it's just, the point is, like, to create an organization where somebody who's not the owner had the emotional wherewithal and intellectual ability to connect dots and go, like, yeah, dude, we got to comp their dinner, and that people could be back to your question about emotion, be emotionally intelligent enough to be able to, not go, oh, it's fine, it's just a dog, or, whatever stupid things people who mean well can say under those conditions. And, so that's what makes it work. Right. And Zing Train is just like trying to back up to your earlier point, like, people who have all this, in quote, success, but they can't explain it. It's like, well, what are we doing? Why does it work? And then teach it to other people so that they can do it. And that woman, Carol Sanford, that the Deep Understanding came from, she talks a lot about two other things that it's what we've already been doing, but I didn't really have language around it. So she said, like, most of the world has been taught to focus on what she calls direct work. So it's like, use this software at the front door and your sales will go up. Post your social media at 8 a.m. and say, whatever it is. But she said the key is really indirect work. And that's where, like, you're doing all this work like we do, where you're teaching people about beliefs, about visioning, about dignity, helping them learn to think so that they make that decision of their own volition to comp the dinner of a guest without permission. in a formal sense because that's how we've created it. And we do the indirect work. So when that situation happens, they know how to think with ethics and values and compassion and humanity in mind. So that's a big one. And I think that's really a lot of what we do. And the other thing she said is that the key is not answers, it's frameworks. Right. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's what we do. The 12 natural laws of business, the 3 steps to great service, the 4 elements of an effective vision. They don't tell you what to write in the vision. That's your content. It just gives you a framework within which you can pour your heart and your head in and create your own thing. And that's really what we do. And a lot of places are telling people the answer. We're giving them a frame within which we've been able to come up with our own answer and then encouraging them to use the same frame, but to come up with a different answer that's true to them.
We meet up at an interesting time. It's January of 2025. Typically, well, and I mean, there's a lot going on in the world. But I'm wondering at the top of the year, do you think like everyone else? You've got this vision, so you know where you're going to be. And I think we're, what?
2032. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say 7 years. I'm doing public math.
Yeah.
So we know where you're going to land, and we know that you've got a decent track record at hitting exactly the targets that you set. But then there's the Ari, the human, right? And so what do you, for me, what I've transitioned probably away from resolutions and more along the lines of I would like more of this year and less of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at your own life, here we are at the top of the year in 2025. What would you like more of and what would you like less of?
Well, I think about visioning more than before I answer more than resolutions, because resolutions, there's a million articles will show you don't really work. And I think the vision does work because it's a story and we bond to the story because it's inside out exercise, not I'm going to lose weight because my doctor told me to, or my significant other told me to, but because you want to create a meaningful life for yourself, of which losing weight or being in shape or whatever is helpful. So, and that when we write the vision, it's not like writing it alone is super powerful, but then sharing it with, like, if you're an owner listening to this or a GM or whatever, and you share your personal vision with your team, you'll do it.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to tell them that you're going to do this in public and then not do it, whereas if we keep it, in here, it's like, oh, I think I'm going to really work on, but we don't really come out with it and we don't attach the emotion to it and we don't share the story. So the vision, I would suggest, is way more powerful. Okay. Backing up to details. I anarchistically, I'll just say calendar years, like political boundaries, are just made up. So I don't really care about it. I try to live every day as does Tammy, my significant other, like it's a holiday. We don't have kids. We have dogs. We're not religious. Every day, she's a farmer. I've been in the food business my whole life, like Sunday, Tuesday, whatever, they're all good. So I just try to, to your question earlier, it's just like find a joy and make every day as great as we can. And, so I'm not really hung up on it's the start of the new year. Plus our fiscal year ends at the end of July. So for me, this is just, it's just another stop. But in terms of managing energy, I would also say, like, because of choices that I make, my life doesn't get particularly busier at the holidays and it doesn't slow down in January. So I'm always working at a high level. I like that. I do it by choice. And it's just as busy for me now as it was the middle of December. And because we're introverts who aren't religious without kids, like we don't have any of the, I'm going to say clutter, which is slightly judgmental, but that other people's lives are filled up with trying to pack the kids, to go to grandma's. And I'm not judging that at all. I mean, it's awesome. And I have friends who it's like highlight of their year, but for us, we don't have that by choice. And so we're able to sort of maintain this, positive level every day. So I'm not that worried. I have worries about the country, but we don't have to go there.
Last question. What are you interested in learning this year?
Well, sometimes I don't know what I'm going to learn. And that's one of the beauties of the e-news, is that because everything, as per one of the lessons in the chapbook, is interconnected. I didn't start out to write that much about Patti Smith, but I started out to write about something else, but that's part of the writing flow, is that it takes me into interesting things. And then I've started to work on the next pamphlet, which is bigger than this chapbook, but smaller than a book, which will be on this organizational ecosystem metaphor, which I've been working on for quite a while, but I want to get it in print so I can start teaching it more. And I think it's a huge shift and I'm sure I'll come back on and we'll do a podcast about it, but it's a really different framework for people to think about organizations in a good way and get them out of the industrial model and to stop thinking about themselves and their companies, their organizations like machines. And I was listening to a very famous podcaster today, interviewing another famous person, and they're like, push this lever, pull this, and I'm like, your brain is not a car engine. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's like a farm. Like, the farmer doesn't pull a lever and the broccoli comes up. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's years of work to make the soil healthy, and what comes in and what goes out, and the weather that you have no influence over, and all these things happening here. So anyway, that model is formed in my head, but I want to get it down on paper and then be able to put it into a teachable model, to your earlier question of what we do about it. So I got that on my docket.